I've been using hardwood offcuts for my jigs. This isn't essential for this project, you can use whatever you have lying around, but for this center marking jig I decided to use a beech offcut. I decided on a length of 14 centimeters for the jig. This is an arbitrary number and you can make it as long or as short as you want. Making it longer will just allow you to mark out wider boards. I measured 20mm in from each end for the guide bearings. Then I marked the centre point between these two lines. It's important that you make the distance between the guides and the centre as equidistant as possible, as this can affect the accuracy of the jig. Once I'd marked these out, I used a punch to give me a good reference point for drilling the holes. I then measured out one of my pencils and decided on a 7.5mm hole. This would allow me to easily get the pencil in and out, but also be able to adjust the depth without the pencil falling out when not in use. The piece that I was using for the jig was not quite deep enough to give a good hold on the pencil, so I used one of the pieces that I'd cut off the end. I mitered off the edges to make it a bit more ergonomic, and then glued it onto the main body of the jig to give the pencil more support. Once that was dry, I could drill out the holes for the bearings and the pencil. I'm using standard skateboard bearings for this jig, and they take an M8 bolt. After the holes were drilled, I flushed up the sides of the jig on the table saw and then gave the whole thing a good sanding. The only M8 bolts which I had on hand were quite short, so I needed to go back to the drill press and countersink the bearing holes so that enough of the bolt could protrude beyond the bearing to be secured by some nylock nuts. I could then assemble the jig. So I put the bolts through the holes, and between the main body of the jig and the bearing I used a washer just to give a little bit of spacing to stop the bearing rubbing against the main body of the jig. As my workshop pencils were quite long, I decided just to trim one of them down so that the jig didn't take up too much room, as with a full-size pencil in there it was sticking out quite a long way. And that's really all there is to it. It's a really simple jig and it's a bit of a one-trick pony, but it's a really useful one to have in the workshop. I really like the bearings on this jig. It means I can mark a line across a piece of wood with little to no resistance, and I end up with a nice clean centre line. If you don't have any bearings on hand, then you could just use dowels. You'll get a very similar outcome. I just had the bearings in the workshop, so I thought they would be a nice addition to this jig. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, then please give it a thumbs up. It would mean a lot to me, and hopefully this will help YouTube recommend my videos to more people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.